What is the Matrix? We've all seen the movie. It's a good one. But was the idea that we're living in a simulated reality imposed by some external force unique to the movie The Matrix? This idea goes back many centuries. So René Descartes, in his famous treatise, Meditations on First Philosophy, used what's called the evil demon analogy, or brain in a vat. He postulated that everything you're perceiving, seeing, feeling, hearing, tasting, and thinking about all of what you're perceiving could be transmitted into your mind by an evil demon or an outside force. That we could essentially be a brain in a vat somewhere, dreaming that we have a body that looks like this body in a world that looks like this world. But somehow the stimulation of the brain is causing thought forms to make our own bodies and the external environment appear a certain way. A more modern idea would be a computer simulation. But René Descartes was also not the first one to come up with this analogy. Plato, in his famous work, The Republic, described the analogy of the cave and the sun and the people being tied to a rock facing the wall of the cave and a fire behind them, transmitting images of people carrying objects on a walkway behind them onto the wall in front of them. And his analogy was, if you've always been tied to this rock, staring at the wall, seeing those images in 2 dimensions moving past you, you could learn to develop a story around that, a prediction of what and who those objects and people are, even though you're only seeing them in 2 dimensions. So his analogy is that at first, you think that's what's real, that 2-dimensional world. You'll develop ideas and beliefs and paradigms around it. And by talking to the people next to you, even though you can't see them there in physical form, but you'll believe they're somewhere out there because their voices are bouncing off the wall, you will interact with others and you'll develop a collective belief system about what's real. So when I first learned about this analogy in philosophy class in my first year of college, I remember my professor saying that this analogy of the cave in Plato's Republic is considered one of the most important passages in the history of literature, and undoubtedly one of the most important passages, if not the most important passage in the history of Western philosophy. I remember when sitting down to read this portion of the Republic, I had read all the chapters leading up to it and the dialogues and so forth, which I took some interest in, but I could actually feel something coming. This is literally true. It's surprising to me because I don't really get premonitions, but as I was approaching reading this chapter, I remember feeling something, and as I read it, it definitely opened something. There was some kind of light shining in from somewhere. And light is a sort of metaphorical phrase here, but I could feel something expand, something bigger than the limited experience I was used to of being in a mind, in a body, believing all the beliefs I'd had all my life that were kind of stereotyped and adopted without my permission. So perhaps that was one of the first big pretastes I had of what awakening or liberation might be like. This was probably 5 years before my first awakening. So in this video, I just wanted to make a comparison between The Matrix as we know it, the movie The Matrix, and what awakening is actually like, especially first awakening and then non-dual realization. Like the movie The Matrix, awakening is a massive shift in how you perceive yourself, the world around you, and how you fit into it. It's often quite dramatic, but more importantly than dramatic, it's just very, very surprising. When you suddenly realize what you've been taking yourself to be, a sort of small, enclosed mental self constantly trying to survive through understanding, to feeling yourself sort of expand out into infinity. And even that doesn't really make a lot of sense because you also expand into the physical experience of being alive here. So it's just a huge freeing up of a lot of boundaries around the sense of self. And some people describe it as the sense of self expands into infinity. So all there is the self, or it's a pure sense of I am. This sense of self is remarkably stable because it's not defined by anything. It's not limited by anything. It has no boundaries. It doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't need to be found or discovered. And importantly, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. Thoughts about shame or regret or doubt just don't stick to it. There seem to be nothing but thoughts. So this is a huge release and a shift in what you take yourself to be, a shift in identity. Now, there are often other components that go along with this awakening, other features, such as a big emotional release. Often you find yourself feeling life in a way you never had before, very free, no resistance to emotion. It's just an experience of being alive and an innocence and enjoyment of it. You suddenly feel like you're not struggling with anything internal anymore. Internal and external kind of melt into one. Now, also with this, there's often a very obvious and natural sense of simplicity or innocence, where there's just nothing to solve anymore. You feel so freed up from having to struggle, solve things about yourself and the world. It's just what's happening right in front of your face. It's so simple, so much flow, so much natural enjoyment. It's like being a child again. Many people say that to me. Like, I remember this from childhood, from very, very young childhood. So it is kind of like another childhood. But it's different in a sense because there's not the naivete of childhood. I don't know if I said that right. But even the child usually can perceive some sense of the identity of personhood closing in around them at some point. This is realizing that paradigm of personhood was an illusion. Personhood needs no paradigm. It sort of expands out into pure being, and that pure being encompasses everything. Now, there are other details to this that I won't go into, but in the sense that you wake up from one reality that's essentially a false reality to a much more natural reality that is more obviously the way it actually is. Very much lines up with the movie The Matrix. Now, what doesn't line up with the movie is you don't wake up in a pod and some robot comes and grabs your body and flushes it down some huge mechanical toilet. You don't meet Morpheus on the Nebuchadnezzar and learn to jack into the Matrix. You just finally feel free. You feel free, finally, of that mental prison, the house of mirrors of thoughts, struggle with thoughts. And if you've watched many of my videos, you know that there's a honeymoon period that follows this typically. And if you've had a deep awakening, often you feel quite enlightened. You might even start transmitting to people around you in a sense, without trying. But pretty quickly, the conditioning closes back in and you have to work through a lot of emotional stuff and some post-awakening movements that are described in other video playlists I have. So sometimes I've said when you wake up from the first matrix, you don't realize it, but you're actually in a second matrix. It's a different kind of matrix. It has different rules. And it has different types of approaches or inquiries that allow you to wake up from this second matrix. And it's very easy to overlook that you're in it. So I would say probably the majority of people that have an initial awakening don't really go far beyond that. Certainly a lot of people do, but I would say maybe the majority don't. And of course there's nothing wrong with that, it's just how it's going. But it's very easy to miss that there are deeper forms or stages of realization that are available. Partially because the shift that happened already in some sense feels complete. What's beyond an infinite self? How would that even work? Also because there's not a lot of good pointing for the later stages. Although I think there's more and more now, which is great. And the third reason is I think there's some confusing pointing out there as well, or at least contradictory, that can be hard to incorporate. So a simple way of saying the difference between the first and second matrix in the way I'm speaking now is that waking up from the first matrix is really about going beyond the conceptual self, the mind-identified, thought-identified self, or the self-identified with gross thought, or the entanglement of identity with gross thought. Now, this can happen and identity as a paradigm itself can still remain intact. So starting to investigate the second matrix is less about trying to continue to expand or dissolve into I am or an expansive sense of being or an infinite sense of being. It's more about looking at perceptual filters that affect how we experience our environment, how we experience the apparent outside world, physical objects, sound, light, sensations, etc. It can be easily overlooked here that the experience of being in a physical world, the experience of being in a three-dimensional world of space, agency, independent movement, solidity, and time is actually an illusion. Now, this gets really sci-fi in a sense. Often when I see comments people write under the videos, I'll recognize that really, at least some people don't get that this is not just a mental thing. It's not a philosophical discussion. I'm not trying to talk about a paradigm of the way the world is, like dualistic or non-dualistic or materialistic or this or that. It's not philosophical. And it's not even about the way you perceive yourself. When it comes to non-duality, the actual physical world, what seems like a three-dimensional world with all the rules of dimension, space, and functioning in space, is seen to be completely illusory. That's what non-dual realization is. It's seeing clearly there are no boundaries, no divisions, no objects, no self apart from the objects, no others, no agency acting apart from anything. So it's a radically different way of experiencing the physical world you live in. So this shift can come very quickly for some people, and others it takes a little time. But it is very much like waking up from the Matrix again in a different way. This feels more like going from a sort of fluid, expansive self to a sort of empty and paradoxical world that's, in a sense, zero-dimensional. But it really is not defined by dimension at all. So you could say it's zero-dimensional, you could say it's 2, 3, 4, 5-dimensional. It doesn't really matter. You can see that the way our mind structures space and time is fundamentally flawed. So maybe you could call it energetic. It's to experience reality in an energetic way. So because the mind can't actually grasp this, it can't imagine it, it's not imaginable, we're often left with something like a mental idea of some empty space or some vast empty space and there's nothing in it. But that's not at all how it feels. That's not how it's experienced. Primarily because it's very intimate. It's like closer than close. Everything is. If you see something that's conventionally speaking across the room, it's not just over there, it's also over here, and it's everywhere in between. It's like quantum superposition. It's like you're experiencing quantum superposition in a very direct way. And it's also completely ordinary. You don't lose the ability to understand, see, and function in the conventional world. You can still communicate to someone that there's a coffee cup over there on the counter. It's just in your immediate experience, it's not like that. In a sense, there's so little to say about it that I'm inclined to never speak about it at all. And really, after I realized this, which is a weird way of saying it, and no one that realizes it, but it became clear and obvious all the time. I didn't talk about it for many years because there's just nothing to say about it. There still isn't. There's also a deep and intuitive sense that not everybody is ready for this. Like, to push somebody into this is very uncomfortable for them, or can be. But others feel so uncomfortable in the world of mind identification and the world of seeming separation that in good conscience I have to talk about it, because it can feel like a huge relief to realize why you've been so uncomfortable. Suffering. What suffering is about. Suffering is about trying to live in an illusory world of dimension, space, separation, doership, and identity when none of those actually exist in natural reality. That's uncomfortable. And for some, it's really uncomfortable, which is really bad news for the person perceiving themselves as the individual. But it's great news from the standpoint of reality. So suffering is a very strange thing, this kind of suffering that I'm talking about, the mismatch between what reality actually is and the way it's perceived. When you're going through it, it's miserable. But on the other side, you see that's what woke you up. That was the fire. That was the push you needed. Because if you're too comfortable, you probably won't go through what you have to go through to realize this, to actualize it. Because what you have to go through is sometimes really uncomfortable. Sometimes it's blissful. Sometimes it's expansive. Sometimes it's contracted. But oftentimes it's just uncomfortable, or you feel things you don't want to feel. You feel rage. You feel sadness, guilt, anger, shame. The emotions come and you can't filter anymore. So you have to feel them. They have to move through the body. The energetics of the body stop filtering reality, because the energetics of the body are seen to be an illusion in the sense that they're of the body. There's just energetics. There's just energy. So even the sense of a body actually goes. Now, I understand that sounds bizarre or radical, or like you wouldn't be able to function. But you can function. You can function perfectly normally. Sometimes it does take adjustment. Depth perception, when form literally starts dissolving. It can be bizarre. It can be an adjustment. But people adjust. They do okay. And after a while, you start to forget what it's like to live in a sense of form, separation, agency, etc. So that's what it really means to wake up from the matrix, the real matrix. So the movie and the Wachowski brothers, I said that right? Sisters now? Descartes, Plato. There's a reason, in my opinion, that these expressions come forward in art. They're pointers. They're urging you, if you want to take it up, to start this investigation into the true nature of reality and be willing to be surprised and be willing to let go and be willing to be uncomfortable. And you'll be very surprised what's possible in a reasonably short time in this lifetime.